Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbyville. October the 18th to the 29th, 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Claude Mounce saw it up close and personal, but he'll tell you that at the time he had no idea it was such a big deal. As a pilot off a carrier that was part of the blockade, it was his job to fly the photographers to where the Russian ships were approaching. Photos were taken, sent back to Washington, where President John F. Kennedy and his military advisors were convinced that the Soviets were planning to stockpile warhead missiles to their bases in Cuba. It became one of the most critical political standoffs in our history. That was just part of a remarkable quarter century of military service by Naval Commander Claude Mounce. Today, Claude and his wife Clara live south of Wellborn, and it's an honor to have him on Veterans of the Valley. Claude, it really is an honor, and thank you for being here with us. Let's talk about the early years of Claude Mounce. You were raised in a little town called McLean up in the Panhandle. Went off at age 16 and went to that university down in Austin, the UT. Sort of take us from there and talk about how that led to your naval career.
If I'd had enough money for a round-trip bus ticket, I would have gone on back home, because coming to a school that had 20,000 students was something else. But anyway, I joined the ROTC. I got my degree in journalism. When I went back my senior year, they said either sign up for active duty or we're going to make you eligible for the draft. So I signed up for active duty. I also signed up for flight training, but in those days, they sent you to a ship for a year. And so I went to a gasoline tanker in the Mediterranean, and that was something else.
Yeah.
But I went through flight school, and I soloed down in Pensacola on my birthday in 1953, and then I did my 6 carrier landings on the USS Monterey on December the 7th of 1953, yeah. And I was a lover, not a fighter, so I didn't want to be a big single-engine aircraft driver. So I opted for the 4-engine airplanes and got my wings. Was sent to a squadron with flying B-26s towing targets. So I was shot at. It just that hopefully they were 5,000 feet behind us when the shells exploded. But anyway, we spent some time in Japan flying the B-26. Later on, we transitioned to the F-9, F-5, and they had no one else to fly them, so they sent me back to Justice School, and I went to a sister squadron and learned how to fly the jets. And of course, those days they didn't have dual pilot aircraft. They just let you read the book and put you in an airplane the way you went.
Right.
And that's what I did. And after I landed the first time, I decided to start smoking again, because it was a pretty hairy experience to be up there and not have to worry about everything, you know, changing the prop and all this sort of stuff. I spent a couple of years in Japan. I was a bachelor. I got to travel a lot. I went to Iwo Jima and Okinawa and the Philippines, and flew some targets for the Republic of Korea.
Wow.
They weren't very good shots either. I came back and got married in San Diego. Went to postgraduate school up in Monterey.
Right.
Went to Mayport, and was in the communications officer at Mayport for a couple of years. And then the Navy, for some reason or other, decided they need some single-engine carrier pilots, so they selected me. And I went up to Quonset Point and learned how to fly a single-engine airplane. But I was not by myself, because there was a blimp pilot there too,
yes,
who transitioned over into ADs.
Right.
But I got qualified, had a problem qualifying because airplanes kept running into each other. Outside of that, it was a very uneventful career. We used to go out on the Wasp and spend a month or so on ASW exercises.
That was the USS Wasp, right? That was the
on
carrier.
the USS Wasp, on the carrier. And the problem with that was that she was based in Boston, we were based in Quonset.
Right.
And so we always had to fly out to the ship, whereas most carriers were based at an airfield and you loaded the aircraft on.
Right. It was the USS Wasp, I believe, is where you flew off of when what we referred to during what we refer to now as the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Talk about that, because when people think about history, they think about that part of history of John F. Kennedy's administration. You all didn't know it was such a big deal, but talk specifically about what the job was there and how it was.
All of a sudden, in a couple of days, we knew that there was a crisis of some sort. In a couple of days, they sent an alert out to us, and we were due to go on the ship in about a week, but they decided to send us out early. And then somebody said, well, we ought to put some guns on the airplane. And that had been ridiculous because we hadn't fired a gun in anger in many years. But anyway, they sent us down to get to Cuba. Actually, we were about 200 miles north of Cuba. And we had a squadron of helicopters, 2 squadrons of S-2Fs, and a detachment of 4 ADs, and I was the officer in charge. And what we'd do is we would fly out and search a couple of 100 miles around the ship to find these ships that would look like they were carrying big long tubes. And if we found one, we would either vector an airplane to come in and take a picture of it, or we would go down and take a picture ourselves. And if the skipper thought that it was appropriate, he would send out a helicopter with a Russian-speaking translator, and they would hover over it and speak to the captain in Russian. And of course, there was the usual things. They traded golden wings for, I don't know, whatever it was. And the gist of the matter was that we spent about 3 weeks doing this, looking for ships. We found probably a dozen, took pictures of all of them. It was a real thrill to fly down alongside a ship at 300 feet and let your observer take the picture. But we didn't know what happened to the pictures, and of course there was no radio broadcasts. There were no radios allowed on the ship. You couldn't have personal cameras, so we didn't know what the hell was going on.
Right.
But we flew around the clock for about 3 weeks, and finally, for some reason or other, somebody said the Russians had decided to take their missiles and go back home. And so if that happened, they said, well, we don't have to fly anymore. So we took a couple of days rest coming back up to Norfolk, or to Quonset Point. And then they let us fly off and go into Quonset. And that was the end of it. You know, it was reluctant heroes is what we were.
Had no idea that you were part of.
We didn't know what the hell was happening.
Yeah, part of something that would become history and that Hollywood would make movies out
well,
of.
we didn't know. We just did our job. We got pretty tired of doing it over and over and over again.
Right.
But just one of those things.
Right. Let's go back to when you first started flying. There were some pretty eventful and adventurous times there. I know that you talked about with when you told me one time that you flew and you were supposed to have somebody flying beside you, but they aborted and you were up there by yourself.
Well, that was when I was learning how to fly the jets. And
right.
Because they didn't have 2 people in the same airplane, they let 2 airplanes take off at the same time. And we were on the runway and we started taking off, and the guy who was supposed to be my instructor aborted. So I wound up at 20,000 feet over San Diego with a big circle of about, I don't know, 30 miles in diameter. And sometimes I was out over Mexico, and sometimes I was out over the Pacific Ocean. And the red light came on, and they said when the red light comes on, you land. If there are 2 red lights come on, you bail out. So I came down to land, and nobody said anything about turning the throttle, taking the throttle off. In fact, I was afraid the fire would go out.
Right.
But I eased back on the throttle just a little bit, and I came across the field at 300 or 400 knots. Well, when I turned, I wound up in Mexico, and when I came back, the runway was sitting way over here, and the fuel was getting lower and lower. And so I slowed down finally and came around and made one land. I had 400 pounds of fuel left. And when I got into the chocks, well, I had the plane captain give me a cigarette because it was a harrowing experience. And the guy kept saying, I'll find you, but he never did find me while I was in the air.
Right.
So anyway, from then on, they sent me over to El Centro, and I towed targets over the Chocolate Drop Mountains for the attack squadrons. And we'd take off in the F-9 and drag a target behind us and get up to 20,000 feet and let the guys shoot at us. And then we'd come back and drop it.
What were the targets?
It was a big piece of metal about 6 feet long, and had a banner on it about 30 feet long with wire mesh in it.
Right.
So that the radar could pick it up. And the airplanes had different colored tips on the bullets. And so they'd shoot at it, and then we'd come back and drop it over the field. We had what they call a daisy cutter. You put it on the cable, and it just comes back and slices it off. and the banner drops, and they decide who shot it and who didn't.
Yeah.
They were lousy shots.
They'd grade the targets.
They didn't do very well.
And they were towed about how far behind the aircraft?
2,000 feet.
2,000 feet.
Well,
so for you to be in
if
danger,
you're flying,
they'd have to be a really bad
If
shot.
you're flying along like this,
Yes.
and the guy turns and he's got a loaded gun, you don't know whether he's going to turn all the way to the target and shoot, or whether he's going to start shooting early and shoot at you.
Right.
And so I was young and foolish. That didn't make any difference to me. Nobody was going to hurt me.
You just didn't want to become the target.
Well,
Or you didn't want to get in the way of the target.
nobody was going to shoot at me, not good old Claude boy. I mean, he was a good kid. He wasn't going to get in trouble.
Nobody was going to mess with you.
No.
Your diverse career then later included a stint at the Pentagon during the height of the Vietnam War, as a matter of fact. I want you to talk about that, your job as a public relations type job at the Pentagon. Talk about that and what that involved.
Okay, after I went to Boston University and got my master's, the Navy said you had to pay back for the time you spent in school, so they sent me to Department of Defense, and I worked for the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs.
Right.
A guy by the name of Sylvester, Arthur Sylvester. McNamara was the Department of Defense commander, and he said if you get a 3-year tour of duty in Department of Defense, you can't go to Vietnam. And of course, we were all volunteering for Vietnam because if you got your ticket punched, that means you're going to get a promotion right away. And I got my promotion instead. But anyway, while I was there, the Peace March, or the anti-war people, came in, and they took over the Pentagon, and we had troops stationed in our quarters, or in the Pentagon, and they told us not to come to work for a week, so we didn't. And we don't know what happened, but the place was a shambles after we came back to work.
Wow.
Empty beer cans all over the place, and cigarette butts all over the place. It was pretty much a mess.
And you were in the public relations department,
Yeah.
so I guess after you got back, there was work to do.
Oh,
right?
yeah. But anyway, for the public relations, we dealt mostly with veterans organizations.
Right.
We dealt with the VFW, the American Legion, the DAV, the Paralyzed Vets, and I think we call it Vietnam Veterans of America. Mm-hmm. But we were involved in all their conferences. We answered all their questions. If we couldn't answer the question, we'd farm it out to the Army or Navy or Marines and then send the answer to them. And it was a delightful 3 years, but I don't know that I accomplished a heck of a lot. So I paid them off for the year I spent in Boston, which was desirable. I mean, that was a nice tour of duty.
Now, from 66 to 69, the veterans you dealt with, I guess, were mostly World War II. I guess there were still a few World War I veterans around at that time also.
A few still alive then, and very few Vietnam or Korean veterans, because they weren't joiners like the old timers were.
Right.
So, and those are all dying off, of course. The World War I and World War II are dying off. So.
Exactly. We got more to talk about. I want to talk about carrier landings. You say I think you made over 500 of those, and every one of them were critical ones.
Every one of them was hairy.
But first, before we do that, I want to go to some photographs that Claude Mounce has supplied to us from his military duty, and even earlier, as a matter of fact. If we can go to some of those photographs. Here we've got a smaller picture than this is you in your youth with your siblings, right?
This is me and my 3 brothers, and we all were in the military in some way or another. Oldest brother Bill was a parachutist and a ranger. I mean, he was big on the whole thing. I was in the Navy. Clyde was a bombardier navigator. In fact, I used to kid him because the Air Force gave him a letter of commendation for shooting all the guns on a B-36 at 20,000 feet. You know, usually they froze up or something happened. Anyway, and Jerry was in the National Guard for 25 or 30 years.
Now, which one is young Claude?
He's the second one. He's the second eldest.
Okay, so in the back?
In the back, yeah.
Back left?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's move on. I think we get you. Now, here's a photograph of you, I believe, at the University of Texas.
I was at the university. That was my NROTC uniform. My brother Clyde was with me for a while, and then he dropped out and joined the Air Force. But that's me and all my uniform regalia.
Good-looking soldier.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
That's the day I soloed. This is the SNJ. We referred to it as a secret Navy jet, but it was a training airplane. The Air Force called it a T-6, It was a big airplane. It had 700 horsepower engine. And this was the day that I soloed. And it was a little unnerving because they made you put a 100-pound sack of sand in the back and tie it in with the safety belts, because the balance was such that you usually fly with an instructor.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I went out and shot 3 landings at a field where you're supposed to be dual pilots with an instructor before I realized what was happening. And nobody noticed anything, so I got the hell out of there in a hurry. But I was safe enough to fly, so
Right.
nothing to it.
Okay, move on.
Oh yeah, there's the F9 F5s. And they took a target and attached it to the speed brakes underneath. Speed brakes came up, but knotted a big hunk of canvas there, attached the cable to the target in the back, and you took off, and you take off and you level off at 1,000 feet, and the target would just fly right up after you. And we went out off the Sea of Japan and let the Navy guys and Marines shoot at us.
And that's a single-seater right there.
That's a single-seater, yeah. And it was nice, though, because when the weather was cold, you close off that canopy, and as you're going down the runway, snow starts coming out of the air vents, and that really cools you off in a hurry.
That's a lot of metal underneath your seat.
And if you're a little bit hungover, you can turn the oxygen on up 100%. That'll sober you up in a hurry. I never did that, but that's what the big boys told me.
This picture is on your wall at your home. Talk about this.
Oh yeah, okay. These are the Sky Raiders. This squadron had 2 different kinds of airplanes. This one was a Sky Raider that had the electronic countermeasures on it. It had jammers and had chaff dispensers and all sorts of things. And they operated off the big carriers. And the airplane that I flew had a big guppy antenna on the belly and had the capability of sending the radar signal from the airplane back to the carrier. So we could be 200 miles away from the carrier, and the carrier could turn its radar off and use our radar to hunt for the enemy or whatever it is they were hunting for.
Now, were these the planes that you used during the Cuban situation?
They were similar, yeah, just like
Okay.
the only thing about
each one of those are 4-seaters, is that right?
those are 4-seaters. The ones we flew in were 3-seaters. They
I
had
see.
2 in front, 1 in back. The guy twiddling the black knobs in the back.
And I believe in that picture, you're number 2 there that we're looking
Number
at?
2, yeah.
Right.
We maneuvered a lot to get that lined up, because the photo plane was an airplane that would only do 160 knots straight down.
Uh-huh.
So we had to get that thing going straight, coming over and taking a picture at the same time. So it was a little difficult.
All right, let's move on. When was this taken?
Okay, this was the official roster photo that was taken to put in the War College little bulletin that they put out, so that the instructors knew who everybody was, and everybody who went to War College got a copy of it, so you know who they were.
Good looking airman there.
Yeah, it used to be.
Yeah. Now I put this in because you were proud of it. You
geez.
sent it to me, and so I wanted to share it with people. That's a
When I
couple of
retired,
double R's there.
When I retired, one of my big things was to buy a Rolls Royce. And I not only bought one, I bought 2. And everything was going fine. I sold one of them, the 67. And the 73, though, was, I hate to say it, but an Aggie student ran a red light and broadsided me
No.
and took care of that. So
That's tough for you and him.
yeah, the only real problem was that we both had insurance with the same company. So when I go to put my claim in, who's the company going to fight for? Not for me.
Well, those are beauties, indeed. You had a 3-month tour, if it were, with a squadron that was disbanded quite quickly in 1970, I believe.
That was a real disappointment. We went back to Quonset Point. It was the same squadron. I was executive officer. We bought a house. We put the kids in school. We bought the kids a horse. And 3 months later, they disbanded the squadron. Got rid of all the airplanes, got rid of all the people. There were 15 of us that were sent down to Norfolk to form a new support group. And we had a B-47 under contract. And we had some what they call BMQs, or missiles that they sling under the B-47. We had a Super Constellation. We had some F-4s. We had some A-4s. We had an A-3D. And we would go out and simulate missiles down at Rosie Roads training, simulate missiles coming in to hit the fleet. And there are 3 lines of defense against missiles. They never did get us. So things were really, really bad. I mean, it's a bad situation.
Yes, sir.
And I left because I had a vertebra taken out of my neck and my flying career was over with. But you wonder whatever happened. Did they ever learn how to shoot down the missiles?
Right.
Did they ever learn how to catch them?
Right.
And you hope that they did.
Exactly.
Because otherwise we're in bad trouble if a missile comes towards us.
Claude, you spent 6 years in Italy, and I want to get back to that as we have time. But I want to talk about carrier landings, of which you believe you
Carrier
count
landings.
531 of them, and you said that every one of them was critical, was scary.
There are people who in the Navy who are liars, and then there's damn liars. Okay, and they're the people who lie about, oh, it was nothing to land on a carrier. Because it was. I mean, you get about 10 seconds from the time you get out there close to the carrier until you land, and that's when you have to fly the airplane critically. And you remember you're doing it yourself because you see a ball there, and if the ball is above the datum line, that means you're high, and you got to get a little bit low, and if you're low, you've got to pull back. And there's an LSO out there, he may say something to you, but he'll normally flash a green light if you're ready to land, or a red light to wave off.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, the first time I went out to land, we'd practiced with the light on the left side, and I went to land on the Wasp, and it was on the right side.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept looking for it. And finally, I found it over on the right side, but I kept trying to fly into the light. And so they criticized me for landing off the center line by about 5 feet, because you're supposed to land right on the center.
Right.
But I finally got the knack of that, gradually. You know, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but they did in this case. Anyway, nowadays I'm drawing retired pay and Social Security,
Mm-hmm.
and they're paying me back for all those carrier landings because I figured they paid about $2 a landing.
Right.
Now the squadrons that I was in were all night squadrons. That meant night takeoffs and night landings. And for a while we did night deck runs.
Right.
They'd get us back 600 feet and turn us loose and let us go. Finally, they decided to put us on the catapult, but the airplane was critical. If the wind was not within 6 degrees of the way the plane was facing, it was dangerous to get a cat shot. And I got a cat shot that the way you signal you're ready at nighttime is flip a light switch.
Right.
Okay, I flipped it and the guy didn't make any movement. So I thought, well, I didn't hit it. So I looked over and went to hit it again, and then he fired me. Well, my head went back, and I thought I was turning to the left at nighttime, black pitch night. But I wasn't, I was going straight. Well, you get vertigo, and you don't know what you're supposed to do other than what the instructor said, believe your instruments. You watch that little airplane.
Right.
It's going straight, then everything's straight, even though it looks like you're flying like this.
That's quite a trust in those instruments when
Well,
your body is telling you might be going in,
Yeah, you're right.
but
10 minutes
that
later,
little airplane is
10
telling
minutes
you
later,
okay.
you know, you finally, and you wish you had some clean underwear. And then, of course, coming back for the night landing, it's the same thing. You sit out there 20 miles from the ship, and you have to get exactly in sync with the rest of them. And since we were single engine, they let us come in first. So if we missed it the first time, we get a chance to come around before we ran out of fuel.
From 71 to 77, I want to touch on this. You were in Naples, Italy, as part of the NATO staff. Talk about what your job was there.
Okay. I was, the Navy was undergoing some money problems.
Right.
So if they put somebody in a job, they decided to keep them there for a while. So I actually spent 6 years there instead of the 2 or 3 year tour. But at the end, I was in charge of all the special weapons, which are nuclear weapons, through the entire Mediterranean for Italy, Greece, and Turkey, and the British at Malta. Mm-hmm. I was also in charge of what they call atomic demolition munitions. They had huge holes drilled in certain strategic locations in Greece and Turkey that they were going to lower these atomic devices down into and set them off in case the horde, the enemy, came and tried to advance through the country. and there were vital passes that were going to, close it off for some reason or other. But I was in charge of making sure that we had them, that the plans were up to date, and I went and checked every one of them once a year. So I did a lot of traveling.
Right.
And they were all safe.
Indeed. You retired in 1977 as a commander, and you brought your daughter to A&M to go to vet school, and you wanted to take care of that, so you stayed here and been here ever since.
She was 17 years old. She barely spoke English. She could speak real good Italian.
Right.
No room at the dorm, so I wasn't about to turn her loose in an apartment all by herself and move to Virginia and retire. So my wife and I took a job here, or took an apartment here. And my wife went down to the Bryan Library to ask about professional magazines.
Right.
Since she had gotten her degree from URI before we went to Naples. And they said, "Oh, are you looking for a job?" And she said, "Well, I guess so." And 2 weeks later, she was hired, and she's been there ever since.
Indeed, she has.
I've been trying to talk her into retiring, but no success.
A lot of people in this community know Clara,
No
your wife, and you all this January, I believe, will celebrate your 50th wedding anniversary. Congratulations on that. And you have 3 degrees from University of Texas. That was your first one in journalism, then public relations at Boston University, and then came to Texas A&M and got a degree in ag engineering and taught for 15 years. Is that right? Congratulations on a wonderful career, and thank you for your service. I wish we had more time, but we're out of time.
It's all right. I can tell lies anytime.
Thank you, Claude. He's the first to tell you that he did not serve in harm's way, but his service to our country makes us safer every day. Claude Mounce was a part of a historical event and he didn't even realize it at the time. But now he's a proud citizen and veteran of the Brazos Valley. We thank Commander Claude Mounce for his service to our country, and to Clara Mounce for her longtime service as our chief librarian. And thank you to our underwriter, First National Bank. And you can read more stories of Brazos Valley veterans in Brazos Valley Heroes each Sunday in the Eagle. I'm Tom Turbeville for Claude Mounce. We'll see you next time on Veterans of the Valley.